When you think of Beethoven's piano sonatas, what comes to mind? For most of us, it's these incredible, monumental pieces of music. 32 masterpieces that feel like they were carved in stone, absolute pillars of the classical repertoire. Yeah, for centuries, they've been treated almost like musical scripture, perfect, complete, totally unchangeable. The idea is that the notes you see on the page are the final, sacred word from the genius himself. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the finished product we all know and love is less of a divine revelation and more of a hard-fought compromise? Thinking about it that way, it changes everything about how we listen to this music. Alright, let's do it. Let's pull back the curtain and see how these supposedly perfect works were actually put together. We're stepping out of the concert hall and straight into Beethoven's workshop. So on the one hand, you've got the clean, pristine, printed editions that pianists spend their lives studying. They give you this impression of a composer who knew exactly what he wanted from the very first note. But the reality? Well, the reality, which we find in his sketchbooks, is a storm of frantic energy, crossed-out ideas, and him constantly second-guessing himself. I mean, these sketchbooks show this incredible creative struggle. For sonatas like the really experimental Op. 26 and 27, or the absolutely colossal Hammer Clavier, you can see him just wrestling with his ideas. He's swapping out entire movements, throwing away fugue themes, squishing sections down at the last minute. He even consulted theory books on how to write fugues. These pieces were just divine downloads. They were forged in the fire of a very intense, very human struggle. A perfect example of this is one of his most famous pieces, the Waldstein Sonata. He originally wrote it with this beautiful but really long, slow movement. So a friend tells him, hey, the piece is too long. And Beethoven was apparently furious. But after he cooled down, he realized his friend was right. So he cut the long movement, which he published separately as the Andante Favori, and replaced it with that short, tense introduction to the finale. He created a masterpiece, not from some flawless initial vision, but from taking feedback and being willing to revise. And maybe the most shocking thing of all, by 1802, Beethoven was looking for bigger fish to fry, things like operas and oratorios. And his own brother, Karl, wrote that the composer didn't bother much with such trifles as piano sonatas anymore. Trifles. It's just a humbling reminder that these works we think of as immortal were, back then, just another step in an artist's ever-changing career. But it wasn't just Beethoven's ideas that were constantly changing. The very instrument he was writing for was a moving target. The technology was evolving right under his fingertips. So he started his career composing on these Viennese pianos, like the ones made by Stein. They had a light touch, a clear sound, and a 5-octave range. But then, in 1803, he gets a gift, a French Erard piano, which has a heavier feel and new pedals, and then later, a powerful English broadwood piano shows up, giving him a massive 6-octave keyboard to work with. Each new instrument opened up a whole new world of sound. The biggest difference was something called the action, basically how the key makes the hammer hit the string. The early Viennese pianos had this light, super crisp touch, where the hammer felt like it was being launched like a catapult. It was perfect for clarity, but that later English action, it was heavier. It required more finger weight, but in return, it gave him a much more powerful, sustained, and sonorous sound. A completely different beast. And this constant tech evolution had a direct, massive impact on the music. When the keyboard range got bigger, Beethoven literally had to go back and rewrite parts of his older sonatas, the reprints. The stronger frames on the new pianos, that's what allowed for that thunderous, almost orchestral writing you hear in sonatas like the Appassionata. And the new pedals created entirely new colors and effects. The music was in this constant conversation with the technology of its day. So, okay, we've got the messy sketches, we've got the evolving pianos, but even when we look at the final printed score, the notes themselves, well, they present their own set of fascinating challenges. Let's geek out on a tiny detail. Beethoven used 2 different marks for short notes, a simple dot and a wedge. Musicologists argue that the wedge means a much sharper, more accented attack than the dot. But for over a century, a lot of editors just printed them all as dots, basically smoothing over a whole layer of expressive detail that Beethoven seems to have intended. A tiny little mark like that can change the entire character of a phrase. This kind of ambiguity led to what you could call the editor wars. On one side, you had performer editors, like Hans van Bülow. They basically added their own phrasings and dynamics to make the music more effective for modern audiences. On the other side, you had these forensic editors, like Heinrich Schenker, who painstakingly tried to strip everything away to get back to a pure original text, what they call an Urtext. And the result? For generations, pianists learning the exact same sonata might have been playing from radically different scripts. And this all leads to a pretty startling conclusion. Even the experts now admit that the search for a single perfect original version is basically a fool's errand. The creation of these sonatas was just so fluid, so in the moment, that a single definitive text might not have ever existed in the first place. So, where does all this messiness and ambiguity leave us? Are we just left with a dusty old puzzle? Not at all. It actually leaves us with something way more exciting. A living, breathing body of work. We all know the number. It's etched into our brains. The official canon of Beethoven's 32 piano sonatas. It's one of those magic numbers in music. And yet, if you pick up some modern scholarly editions, they now include 3 early sonatas from when Beethoven was just a teenager. They publish collections of 35 sonatas. So it turns out, even the number we all take for granted is part of a living, ongoing debate. But here's the real takeaway. In the end, all these so-called problems are actually the source of the sonata's incredible enduring power. The messy sketches, they show us a relatable human artist, not some distant god. The evolving pianos, they're a record of a revolutionary time in music. And the ambiguous scores, they empower the performer to be an active interpreter, not just a robot playing notes. These aren't static museum pieces. They are alive. So the next time you hear a Beethoven sonata, don't just ask yourself what the music is saying. Ask yourself, which version of that music am I hearing? Which chapter of its incredible, messy, and fascinating story is being told right now?